Suppose I look out my window and see a canary. Is there any situation where I then might say to myself something like, okay, there's a canary there, but is it me who's seeing it? Or suppose I'm sitting at my desk and I feel a pang of hunger. Would it ever make sense for me to then think something like, okay, there's some hunger there, but am I the hungry person? Is it my hunger? Well, many people have thought that those questions just don't make sense. And they don't make sense because certain kinds of judgments are immune to error through misidentification. So those examples are taken from Wittgenstein and Shoemaker, and Sidney Shoemaker was the first to put the principle of immunity to error through misidentification into its canonical form. To say that a judgment X is F is immune to error through misidentification, in Shoemaker's sense, is to say that one can't go wrong in that judgment for the sole reason that one has misidentified X as a thing that is in fact F. So if there I am looking out the window and I think I see a canary, I judge I see a canary. Now maybe that judgment will be false because it's not really a canary I see. But on the other hand, it doesn't seem like it could possibly be false for the sole reason that it's not me who's seeing the canary. Or in the other example, maybe I'm not really hungry when I judge I feel hungry. Maybe I'm just nervous, right? But can the judgment be false just because it's not me who's hungry? It's in fact someone else. To the extent that it seems like it can't, that's going to be a judgment that is immune to error through misidentification. And there's plenty of debate about which kinds of judgments and when are of the sort that are immune to error through misidentification. But it's widely agreed that judgments about one's own current mental states made through introspection are paradigmatic cases of judgments that are immune to error through misidentification. Focusing on those cases alone, I want to put forward the following principle, which I'll call introspective immunity. According to introspective immunity, present tense self-ascriptions of mental states where the first person pronoun is used and where introspection provides the grounds, are immune to error through misidentification. Now, what is introspection? Well, we can define it neutrally for the time being as just the way or ways that people ordinarily come to know about their own current mental states. So for the time being, just aiming to be neutral about how introspection works. Now, the important thing about the introspective immunity principle is that it says that certain kinds of errors just can't happen. If one judges oneself to be in a particular mental state, and if introspection provides the grounds for that judgment, then, according to introspective immunity, one cannot err in that judgment simply because one has ascribed the state to the wrong person. Now, I think we can all agree that these kinds of errors don't typically happen, and it's indeed quite difficult to imagine how they would happen, but still we can ask about the modal force of the cannot here. Is the idea just that, well, if you're an ordinary person with ordinary human anatomy, you're not going to fall into these kinds of errors? Or is it something stronger? Is it sort of conceptually or logically necessary that there will never be such an error? Are such errors flat out impossible? And I think very many people have interpreted the impossibility in that latter, stronger sense. And that's the idea that I want to take issue with here. So I'm going to be arguing in this presentation that the introspective immunity principle is in fact contingent. There are situations where a person might become introspectively aware of a particular experience or mental state, but then err in self-ascribing it. Now, why does it matter if such errors could occur? Well, many people have thought that introspective immunity and immunity to error through misidentification in general says something really crucial about the nature of self-consciousness, self-awareness, and even perhaps about the nature of the self itself. And in fact, I think those principles are making important claims about the relationship between introspection and the self, but I don't think all the claims they're making are correct. And I think that reflecting on the contingency of the principle on situations where it could potentially be violated stands to show us something important about the real relationship between introspection and the self, and introspection and personhood. And now I think I've been a little too coy here. Let me just specify that one of my conclusions will be that if introspective immunity holds for some mental states, things like beliefs, desires, and intentions that have an especially close link to ideas about personhood, it may not hold for other mental states such as perceptual experiences and sensations. My discussion is going to focus on an actual pair of Craniopagus conjoined twins, Krista and Tatiana Hogan, who are two little girls attached both at the head and at part of the brain. They share what one researcher calls a thalamic bridge, a neural pathway from one girl's thalamus to the other's. As we'll see, this connection seems to allow for some remarkable abilities. I first read about the twins in an excellent 2011 New York Times Magazine article by Susan Dominus, and there's a link to that article here, and together with the article on the New York Times site, there's a video as well depicting the twins and some of their abilities. So if you have time, I'd recommend just pausing this presentation and going and having a look. Let me just add as a quick footnote here that in talking about Krista and Tatiana, I certainly don't want to sensationalize these two little girls or to minimize in any way the real challenges they face as a result of their condition. The whole point here is just to see what we can learn about ourselves by thinking about their extraordinary situation. Now, by all appearances, their neural bridge allows for some remarkable abilities, many of which Susan Dominus discusses in her article, and several of which you can see in the linked video as well. For example, with her eyes covered by her mother's hand, Krista seems able to report on what kind of object, a toy pony, has been raised before Tatiana's eyes. And another example, facing the opposite direction, Tatiana knows when and where Krista is being tickled, and she's not in any position where she could see that. Each twin seems to know what the other is seeing or feeling and maybe even thinking in a way others cannot. Each seems to know these things through introspection. Now, as Dominus herself notes, no controlled studies have confirmed these capacities. But brain imaging clearly shows a connection at or near the thalamus of each girl, and such a connection fits with the many unusual anecdotal reports of their behavior, because the thalamus is known to be a multimodal relay center of sorts between early sensory inputs and higher processing areas. So it's reasonable to think that sensory signals initially registered in the brain of one twin might travel via the thalamic link to the brain of the other. And note that their brains are otherwise relatively normal. Each twin has two cerebral hemispheres connected by a corpus callosum. Their neural overlap appears to begin and end at their thalami. So going forward, I'm going to assume that the twins do, in fact, have a kind of immediate access to experiences that occur in each other's minds, a kind of access that others do not have. Now, one might well grant that each twin has a kind of direct access to the experiences, thoughts, and sensations that occur in the other's minds without yet thinking that that poses any challenge to introspective immunity. The reason is this. To get a really good challenge to introspective immunity, what we want is a situation where we can confidently say that a person is introspectively aware of an experience that does not occur within her own mind. Because if we can say that, then we can see how it could be that a person could be introspectively aware of an experience and then err in ascribing it to herself. And the situation as described so far is not clearly a case where that happens, for the following reason. The situation could instead be something like this. It could be that when one twin is immediately aware of the other's experiences, it's only in the sense that she sometimes tokens in her own mind copies of the experiences enjoyed by her twin. So consider the case where Krista correctly reports with her eyes closed that Tatiana is seeing a doll, or a toy pony. It might be that information concerning the visual experience V as of a toy pony had by Tatiana is sent via the thalamic link to Krista's brain, where C, a corresponding copy of V, is realized in Krista's visual cortices. I'm calling this a two-token scenario. Essentially, there's two versions of the same type of experience, an experience as of a toy pony. And if Krista is able to report that Tatiana sees a doll by being introspectively aware of C, we do not have a clear challenge to introspective immunity, because arguably Krista is not introspectively aware of a mental state that in fact occurs outside of her own mind, such that she could then misascribe it to herself. Rather, she's introspectively aware of one of her own mental states, and in virtue of its matching a state of her sister, is able to say what her sister is seeing. To get a really clear counterexample to introspective immunity, we'd need to assume that there's just one token experience of the toy pony between the two twins. So, for example, we'd have to assume that neural activation within the visual cortices of Tatiana, say, gives rise to a single experience of the toy pony, and then, thanks to the thalamic link, Krista is able to gain awareness of that experience. That would look something like this. This is what I'll call the one-token scenario. Here, there's a single experience V as of a toy pony realized by patterns of activity within Tatiana's visual cortex. However, the thalamic link allows for direct causal contact between V and introspective processes that are realized in Krista's brain. In this way, Krista is able to become introspectively aware of V and to thereby judge that Tatiana sees a doll. And I'm assuming here that other sensory motor cues make it evident that Krista that her own eyes are closed. Now, to be clear, the claim is not that we have good reason to believe that the one-token scenario is in fact what is occurring with respect to Krista and Tatiana. Rather, the proposal is just that it's a possibility. Further empirical investigation might show that it's the best supported account of their situation. And even if it doesn't, if neuroimaging, combined with what we know about the way thalami work, supports something like the two-token scenario instead, I think we still have a clear picture of how the one-token scenario could correctly characterize some possible set of neurally conjoined twins that are not too different from Krista and Tatiana. Because in order to challenge introspective immunity's claim to being a necessary truth, we just need a plausible description of a possibility, not an actuality that challenges it. So my appeal to the quite actual Hogan twins should be understood in that spirit, as enabling us to form a vivid picture of a possibility that might otherwise seem not to exist by showing us that it's very close to, if not identical with, an actuality. Now, the one-token scenario, as described, makes a crucial assumption, which is that we can distinguish between an introspective higher-order state or process on the one hand and the first-order mental state on the other that the introspective process makes one aware of, that these are, in fact, as they say, distinct existences. Now, that view of introspection conflicts with Sidney Shoemaker's own view, and I'm not going to be able to discuss his reasons for doubting it here. I'm just going to note that there are currently many people who think that a distinct existences view of introspection is essentially correct, and there are many different such views. Some of them are listed here on the slide. All of these kinds of views should allow for the possibility that an introspective process might be realized in Krista's brain that, through a special causal connection through the thalamic link, allows Krista to become introspectively aware of a first-order visual state realized in Tatiana's brain. And I'm just going to assume, going forward, that right now we don't know that all of these views are false, and so that one of them might possibly be correct. However, even granting the possibility of the one-token scenario, together with a distinct existences view of introspection, we still don't have an obvious challenge to introspective immunity, because the one-token scenario might be a situation where the twins in fact share ownership of V, in the sense that V occurs in both of their minds. Because I'm not assuming here that the only states in one's mind are those realized in one's brain. So this is an open possibility. They may be sharing the single experience V in the way two people might share a milkshake. If that's the situation, then it won't be possible for either twin to erroneously self-ascribe V, and in so doing violate introspective immunity. So something needs to be said to make it plausible that they might not share ownership of V. Well, one reason they might not share ownership of V, one reason Tatiana might be the sole owner of V, is that normally a person is the sole owner of all the mental states realized in her brain. By that criterion, this would make Tatiana the sole owner of V. However, as I said, I don't want to just assume that that's the case at all times. So this presumption, right, can be overturned if we have reason to think that introspectively accessing a mental state is what makes it the case that it occurs in one's mind. If that is what makes it the case that it occurs in one's mind, then we'll have good reason to think that they do in fact share ownership, and so we won't have a good counterexample to introspective immunity. So we can put this idea in the form of a principle that I'll call Midas Touch. According to Midas Touch, person S's accurate introspective detection of mental state M, or S's current ability to become introspectively aware of M should she try, is what makes it the case that M occurs within S's mind. And I give the principle the joking name Midas Touch because just as King Midas had the remarkable ability to turn anything he touched into gold, so on this view, introspection has the remarkable ability to turn anything that it makes one aware of into a proper part of oneself. Well, I've left Midas Touch by itself purposely vague between a few different interpretations. Are we to interpret it as a necessary condition on a mental state M's occurring in S's mind, a sufficient condition for M's occurring in S's mind, or both? Well, I want to look at them separately. Now, I think it's pretty clear that Midas Touch, taken as a necessary condition on mental state ownership, is clearly too strong. It basically makes it impossible for anybody to own a mental state that they cannot at will become introspectively aware of. So it basically rules out anything like a Freudian unconscious. It conflicts with robust work in social psychology, showing that people are often unaware of their true beliefs, intentions, and desires. It's at odds with some convincing arguments by people like Eric Schwitzgebel, who've shown that ordinary introspection is quite unreliable. And I just think, in general, most people are willing to accept the idea that a person can have mental states that they are not themselves introspectively aware of and that they can't make themselves aware of. I should say that immediately after this, I asked Courtney, who was cutting my hair, whether she agreed that a person could have mental states that they could not make themselves aware of. And she agreed that they could. So results from experimental philosophy appear to support this conclusion as well. Of course, it could be that Midas Touch is too strong as a necessary condition, but still makes sense as a sufficient condition. So maybe S's becoming introspectively aware of M suffices for M's to occur in S's mind. And I think a decent argument can be made for Midas Touch as a sufficiency condition, and I'm going to look at that next. Before going to that, I do just want to point out that if we've decided that Midas Touch is too strong as a necessary condition, that means we're already committed to there being some other set of conditions that are sufficient for M's occurring in S's mind that don't include S's being able to introspectively access M. That means that if we go on to accept Midas Touch as a sufficiency condition, it will be a kind of a second sufficiency condition in addition to these other ones that we're already committed to. So now it'll take a little bit of building up, but let me get to the argument, the set of reasons why one might think that Midas Touch constitutes a sufficiency condition. Let's call a person's memories, beliefs, desires, and personality traits her core psychological features. Fast, widespread, and permanent changes in the core psychological features inhering in a body and brain raise the question of whether the same person has continued to exist. That's why I'm calling them core psychological features. Now, it seems plausible that what makes some set of core psychological features cohere into those of a single person or individual is that they bear some special causal and inferential relation to each other. Indeed, one could reasonably hold that the very existence of a person at some point in time depends upon there being some such causally and inferentially integrated network of states in place. This idea coheres with what have come to be known as Neo Lockean conceptions of personhood. If one could somehow identify these causal and inferential links among a network of states with the introspective accessibility relation, if they were somehow one and the same thing, then one might have a reason for viewing Midas Touch as a sufficiency condition. For the introspectability of these states, now conceived of as their close causal and inferential integration with each other, they're forming a causal network of the right kind, would be what underwrites the existence of a person in the first place. One could even argue that the rationality required for personhood requires, in particular, the close causal and inferential integration of higher-order beliefs with first-order beliefs, where this introspective integration leads to increased accuracy, coherence, and consistency in the first-order beliefs. If that were right, then we'd have a special reason for including the introspectability of a state among the causal and inferential links that give rise to personhood. Now, the important point here is that if persons fundamentally just are such networks of states, it'll be hard to see how any core psychological state with a place within such a network could not be a proper part of the mind of the person it helps realize. Considerations of brain location of the sort highlighted by the twins will appear secondary. I think seen in this light, Midas Touch gains some plausibility as a sufficiency condition. But I think we can grant the Neo Lockean conception of a person, together with its fusing of introspection with the kind of causal network needed for personhood, while insisting that this only gives us reason to think that Midas Touch might be a sufficiency condition for core psychological features, that is, the kinds of mental states that give rise to personhood that are especially closely linked to the notion of a person. There are other mental states, say perceptual experiences, that aren't as closely tied to the notion of personhood. Fast, radical, and permanent changes in those kinds of states don't suggest changes in personal identity. And so I think whatever grounds these reflections on Neo-Lockean conceptions of personhood might give us for accepting Midas Touch as a sufficiency condition for core psychological states, they don't extend in any straightforward way to perceptual states. So the situation with Chris and Tatiana might still be something like this. It could be that between the two twins there are two distinct networks of core psychological features, two distinct sets of beliefs, desires, intentions, memories, and personality traits, where the states within each set are causally linked in the way necessary for single personhood. All of that still leaves room for the hypothesis that the thalamic bridge allows the girl's networks of core psychological features to have an unusually close causal connection to some of the perceptual states of her twin, a connection of the kind that each person normally has only to her own perceptual states. If that's what's going on here, then we do in fact have a situation where Krista might be introspectively aware of an experience, V, that does not occur within her own mind. My conclusion then is that we don't have any good reason to think that Midas Touch is a sufficiency condition with respect to perceptual states. Just a sec. Hello? Yeah, I can't talk. I'm at an online consciousness conference. Yeah. Well, I was just giving them my conclusion, which is that if we don't see Midas Touch as a sufficiency condition with respect to perceptual states, then the one token scenario may, after all, be a good counterexample to introspective immunity. It might be a situation where Krista could become introspectively aware of an experience in Tatiana's mind and then err in self-ascribing it. And maybe such an error would occur if she's just not paying attention or has some ambiguous sensory cues. So it turns out that introspective immunity is in fact contingent. I'd like to conclude with a brief Humean addendum because I think the intuition that Midas Touch articulates a sufficiency condition on mental state ownership is hard to abandon, and I think some of its attraction may trace to the influence of a broadly Humean conception of selfhood. Hume, when introspectively examining his ideas and impressions, couldn't find anything over and above those very states on which to hang the title of self. He thus proposed that selves are nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions, which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity, and are in a perpetual flux and movement. However revisionary his position was in its time, even Hume didn't contemplate the possibility that some part of his introspective bundle may be a part of someone else, and not a part of himself. Of course, if what it is to be a self is just to be some particular bundle of conscious perceptions, if there's nothing more to it, then there are no competing factors, such as a body and brain, in virtue of which two parts of a single bundle might not be parts of the same person. Introspective immunity will be inevitable. Yet, to the extent that particular selves tolerate periods of unconsciousness, and short of outright eliminating selves, there must be some further fact that determines whether some bundle at time 1 is a stage in the same self's career as another bundle at time 2. That is, we must appeal to something beyond sequences of conscious mental states to explain why we wake up each day as the same person who went to sleep. And really, that's just a question of personal identity. The irony is that we may still be tempted to view the question of this further fact through a Humean lens, asking what makes it the case that this one unified bundle of consciousness at time 1 is a stage of the same self as some other such bundle 5 days later. But if some bundles may contain states that are no part of the person who is introspectively aware of them, as I've essentially argued is possible today, then this is not quite the right question to be asking. Thanks very much for your attention, and thanks to Richard Brown and John Schwenkler for organizing the conference and this session.